Good morning. This is Angela Coulter bringing you this week's Living the Shift live stream / podcast. And this week I want to talk about energy healing, one spiritual journey, as and the originator of a practice called training energy progression. I always get these questions, and actually not even just that, but that I work with different people all the time from all kinds of belief systems, all kinds of practices. And they ask me, is this better? Is this worse? Like, what about this? And what about that? Or then what happens a lot of times is when I work with somebody or just in our discussions in the spiritual community, we talk about things like somebody coming in, this person still is, stuck in this kind of practice. And, no matter what I say, they won't listen to me and things like that. And I'm just like, well, but here's the thing. We talk about letting go of judgment. We talk about letting go of deciding for other people. Because when we decide for other people what's right or wrong or good and bad, what we're saying is that we know their journey better than they do. Even if they're not conscious about what they're doing, they are at some level really committed. We are all committed to what it is we set out to do here, right? So, then I have many that I know who, we get into energy healing, we get into higher consciousness work and focus, and then we start to judge. But here's the funny thing: then we start to translate it into judgment of what I'm doing versus what other people are doing. Hey, Ann, thanks for joining. So, it reminds me of when I first left corporate. My first business was, before I did this stuff, was an organic herb nursery. And what was interesting was my guidance had been to get out of corporate and do something else, right? So I did something completely different. I had been growing herbs on my own. I had gotten that somebody had given me a small greenhouse. It had gotten overflowing. I started giving my extra plants to people. And then I got this idea for nursery, the property on the other side of my back fence that went up for sale, like all this kind of stuff. This is relevant. Just give me a minute. I'll get there. But when I did research and I started talking to growers who were already organic or had been organically certified and whatever, because that was my goal, which I did become organically certified. One grower gave me a really great analogy, and I still use that because I use that here today, right? In this kind of context, in all kinds of contexts, in terms of spiritual energy healing, going at things from higher consciousness versus from managing from the ground level. And so this grower said to me, he said, well, I just want to let you know, he said, were you brought up, in an organic environment, getting into an organic growing business? And I said, no, not at all. I wasn't even brought up in a growing environment. I was, I was a New Yorker, I was a Long Island girl. And so he said to me, so this is the mistake that many people who get into organic growing make. And it was funny because when he said this to me, it was like a big mirror to myself. He said, many times when somebody gets into organic growing, that has been brought up in what do you call that? Conventional way, right? Conventional growing way, which means they use pesticides and all this other kind of stuff. What tends to happen at first is they move into growing organically, but then instead of just using the nasty pesticides and everything else, they use pesticides that have been like OMRI approved and that are safe for humans and all that kind of stuff. And he's like, and that's a good step in itself. And he said, but the thing to realize is eventually you'll get to the place where you understand that there's this natural biorhythm that happens. And the thing for us to manage as an organic grower is the natural rhythm of stuff, right? So it's changing, it's undoing what we've been trained to do, to say, oh my God, I see a bug, I have to put a pesticide on this. Or, I'm going to buy the propaganda and I'm going to go and put this blue stuff to feed my plants, even though I'm eating the stuff that the plants are, that they're producing. And so anyhow, so the thing is, so we sort of do the same thing, and it's better. It is better. He said, but the thing is, ultimately, the idea for sustainable growing is working with nature and not against it, like finding the way to optimize that inner relationship. So going back to the topic for today, what happens often is that we get into like different spiritual belief systems, we get into different practices, and we think that, okay, so we've been in one, it's sort of outdated, we move into another one, and then we start doing things the same way, even just with different vernacular or different like terminology or whatever. And you know, when we talk about energy healing work, there's such a vast amount of different kinds of energy healing practices, right? And I mean, I took a ton of them before Trinity Energy Progression came into me. But but what we tend to do when we move from the 3D management plane, from like how I look at it is managing from the ant's eye view to managing our reality from a much higher view, the first thing we do out of habit is we tend to take the same practices we did from this very little ant's eye view and separation-based view and try to incorporate it into this higher-based view. That's where we come into challenges and limitations, right? So we come into limitations on things like belief systems where it's like, okay, well, you know, I'll hear people talk about how church is just political and it's just power hungry, and in many cases that is the point in many old belief systems and stuff like that. But then they'll get into a spiritual practice, and you know, they'll grow a practice where, you know, you have to be they have to be the guru, or they're the teacher, and somebody has to be the guru, and so everybody has to look up to them and everybody has to get the answers from them. Well, that's the same thing that the churches sort of have, you know, taught for a long time. You know, it's part of a cultural thing, and that's fine. So then they can then continue the same kind of energy of limitation. So what I tell anybody who comes to me, and it was funny because I hold this meetup group every month at my house, and I call it Consciousness Transformation Discussion Group. And anybody who's been on an active spiritual journey, who has like sort of more advanced things to talk about, and or does this for a living and just wants to talk shop, that, you know, they're welcome to come, because it's not practice specific. We're not there to sell our wares or like our specific practice. What the purpose of the group is, my guidance was to create a group where we just came together and talked about what's going on with us, or how we're seeing things, or cool things we're noticing, or whatever, without the context of, well, you know, this particular practice, or this, you know, my practice says this, or whatever. It's just what I'm seeing, what we're seeing, because we're the ones who are having the experience. The practices are tools, right? And I'm not dissing church going practices. I'm belief systems and stuff like that. In fact, what I tell anybody is any belief system, any spiritual practice, any energy healing practice is great as long as it helps to expand your consciousness, and with the overall intention to come to a place of unity and love, self-empowerment, or whatever. And when you get to that point where it stops being that for you, when you become sort of a slave to it, because you're a slave to the rituals that are embedded in it, because you're enslaved to, you know, somebody telling you what to do, or some guru or a priest or whatever telling you what to do, versus you listening to the guidance of the divine that comes from within you, that's when it's time to move on to the next thing. Now, we are such creatures of habit. And the reason I bring this up, this has been a topic for the last several days, probably the past week. And it came up in my discussion group on Tuesday night. We were just talking about this. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what label, what category you put on what you're doing. What matters is that it helps you to expand into your own self-empowerment. It matters that at some point you feel like you have the allowance, or that you will allow yourself to get beyond. So for example, somebody in the group have recently just taken, I think, Reiki 2. I think it was Reiki 2. And she was talking about, symbols and doing the symbols and the chokure and all that kind of stuff. And we were talking about all kinds of things and how, well, this makes this more, like in this discussion, we came into like, this makes this more powerful and da, da, da. And what was great was there was a number of us there that we were just sort of talking. And it was like, well, at the end of the day, none of that's necessary. It's all just a reminder. Like, and it was great because we were all from different, it wasn't all just like the Trinity practice or whatever. We're from all different practices. We came to the table and we're just like, yeah, well, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, if that helps you to focus the power of the divine unconditional love that comes through you, well, then use it. And then at some point you will feel comfortable enough with accessing that within yourself that you don't need it anymore. That's what I tell everybody about anything, in any practice, any ritual, any words they used, any incantations, any particular ways of doing things. Part of the challenge that we have is that we believe that because something has been in place for a very long time, that it must be legitimately good for right now. That is not the case. And it's not saying that it never was, but there are many things that we like hold on to. We're talking about so many ways of letting go of our things that don't serve us. That's a big, pervasive movement right now. And so when we are in the middle of doing that, so here's the other thing. So here's that translation. So, okay, we look at our 3D lives and we're letting go of relationships and jobs and lifestyles and changing all kinds of things so that we can really step into our power. But then we insist on doing things the same way in our spiritual sense that we've always done them, right? So somebody gets stuck in a place of, I have done this practice for how long? And so that's the only thing I'm comfortable doing. So that's what I'm going to do, because there can't be anything better than that. And it's like, well, actually, that's a limiting thought. That's a limiting belief. Because we are still remembering how to shift into that place of full self-empowerment. Because when we're embodied like this, in separation, we've forgotten, and that's been part of the game of forgetting. And now we're remembering. We've shifted the entire of the earth into a new dimension, into a new vibration. Yet we're still trying to hold on to some things that don't serve us, which is why we find so much friction going on in so many things, and even institutions and the way we do things. And we're still trying to, going back to that analogy that I was talking about with organic growing and stuff, we are still holding on to in many ways, the old way of doing things as we move into, as we are trying to also exist in this new dimensional vibration. And if you want to know about that concept that we've shifted the entire earth into a new dimension in 2012, you can go look at my other Ascended World podcast, my other podcast that I do with my friend Sarah C. Avignoni. So we talked about that, I think within the last couple of weeks. But anyhow, so here we are in a new place, in a different place, and we're about to move into an even more different place. And yet we're still trying to lug behind us a lot of stuff that was there before. So what it makes sense to say everything that was there, let's look at everything that was there in the same way, right? So if I've had something in my life in the same way and it hasn't changed, does it still suit me today the way that it suited me when it came into my life, into my consciousness? This is the challenge that we have, because we have put so much weight and value on tradition and lineage and all this kind of stuff. So for example, if we want to go back to belief systems, right, and religious beliefs, so many people I know were brought up, say, all right, Catholic, right, brought up Catholic or Christian or whatever. It doesn't even matter what it is, Jewish, and it's all kinds of belief systems. So there's so many people I know brought up this way, brought up Catholic, just as an example, right? Really didn't have a good taste for the church, didn't have a good taste for the practice, but it was what their parents taught them and what they practiced because their parents sort of made them when they were a kid. And then they grow into an adult. They don't really go to church. They're not really active in it. Then they get married. And what do? They get married in a Catholic church. Why? Because it's tradition, because it's what the family expects, right? Then they have a baby, right? Now, the only time they've been to church, say, since they got married was when they got married, and then they have a baby and then they go get the baby baptized. Why? If it's not if it's not an active practice of the individual, why do we continue to do these kind of things and put all this energy and money and stuff into that kind of stuff? I remember and I was brought up in an Episcopal household. My father was very active in the Episcopal Church, and I went all through my childhood until I was a teenager, and I was like, yeah, I'm done with this. I went to church a couple of times. I explored all kinds of practices, all kinds of belief systems. But I remember when I had my first child, and my father was so incensed because I chose not to get my children baptized. And he could not understand why I wouldn't do that. And I'm like, well, first of all, I don't go to church. I don't believe in the church. I don't follow the teachings of it. So why would I get my children baptized? And he was just going on and on and on. And I remember one day I just sat down across from him and I said, okay, here's the thing. If you could sit here and convince me right now that if my beautiful, pure, innocent child died tomorrow, that because they didn't get water splashed on her head, that God wouldn't love her. If you could convince me of that and why that could be, then I'll get them baptized. I'll get her baptized. And he sort of looked at me for a minute, and he just didn't know what to say because of the way I worded that. And it was like, well, it had nothing to do with tradition. It had nothing to do with, anything that I've been taught or my family. It had to do with everything of where I was and where my husband was and what we felt about our kids. And I said, well, here's the thing. I want my children to grow up and decide for themselves what they believe in. Because I know so many people who follow belief systems that they don't really feel. And that's where they then are limited in their particular spiritual growth. Okay. So whether it's a belief system or not, doesn't matter. It could be belief system, it's a religious, or it could be a religious system. It could be spirituality. It could be energy healing work, because it's all the same kind of stuff. Because you have somebody who has done one practice for so many years and the practice has stayed the same essentially. And it's like, oh no, you've always got to do this, and you've always got to do this way, and you've got to do it this way. And sometimes they don't even feel it that much anymore, but because it's habit, they sort of feel like they're contributing to it. So they continue to do it instead of saying, I'm not feeling this the way I used to. And it's not that it's bad. It's that it might've served me back then, but it doesn't serve me right now. Right. And if you say, okay, so does this serve me right now? Does this help me to expand on the quest of remembrance to a place where I am enlightened in the self-empowerment of my divine self, where I live and exist fully in the enlightenment of my divine self? And if it is telling me that I have to do anything outside of me to gain that, then it is limiting me to some degree. And sometimes, even if in the bigger picture, there's little pieces that do help to expand the consciousness. I'm very thankful to all of the stuff that I experienced growing up, because I had so many different friends that were from different backgrounds, religious backgrounds and belief backgrounds, besides my own having to go to church and stuff. And then I even had my great grandmother was a Jehovah's Witness. And then I had so many friends that were Jewish and Buddhist and all kind of, and Muslim, and all different kinds of background beliefs, which was great, because then when we talked about it, like, I was always more curious than anything, like how it connects, because I never believed that one thing was right and everything else was wrong. Right. So here's the thing. Words are semantics. Words are tools. When we create religious belief systems or spiritual systems, we do it from this particular, like a cultural viewpoint, a contextual standpoint, and we create our rituals typically based on that kind of stuff, right? What I tell people, what I tell others all the time is, not just people, actually non-incarnates too, we have just this interaction, is we're so dependent, we don't even realize we're dependent on even words, right? A prayer, an incantation, an intention, a creation, right? Now they are good. They are good, like even the symbols, right? Same thing. They help us to focus our energy toward this creation, right? Because we believe we have to use words to focus, right? The word abracadabra, which I was talking to someone about, my friends the other day, I think it was, about how, the words abracadabra mean I create as I speak, or something along those lines. Aramaic for I create as I speak. And even the belief system that the universe was created with the one sound of Om, which is where Om comes from. And so, like, sound is frequency, right? And we equate that to sound because we think of frequency and sound because of the way our ears pick up vibration. But our ears don't pick up all the vibration, like the way they've evolved here in our physical sense. So when we get to a place where we have sort of used up where we are, right, we can go beyond it. And I even teach this. In my practice, in the Trinity Energy Progression practice, I talk about, and this isn't a plug for that, this is just, I'm just telling you from my perspective. So my understanding when it came in was, okay, this is to help people really, really accelerate fast. And part of that is it continues to evolve, continually evolving and expanding to help those who are practicing to get into a place where they don't need anything anymore, including the practice, because they just become that divine lighthouse, that divine embodiment themselves in everything they do. And it sounds really easy. We have a lot of steps along the way because the mind does try to get in the middle of it. So what we do is we create steps and tools to focus our minds and allow us to let go of the clenching of the mind, because the energy is so much bigger, so much bigger. It's the same. So it's the same kind of thing too when we do energy healing work, because you'll have like 10 different people talk about 10 different ways to do something. And that theirs is the best way. And I'm actually not concerned with that anymore. I used to be part of it because that was like part of the shifting into a different place. But, like what part of the reason I do this meetup group that I do once a month is so that we get together to realize that it doesn't matter what our practices are semantically, culturally, in a place of 3D structure or ritual or anything. But the ideas and the understandings, the consciousness behind it, and our remembrance and us coming home together, that's what's really important. And we get so lost in fighting about semantics. We get so lost in fighting about what's right and wrong, or better or worse, or what is the right way to do something or the wrong way to do something. And we forget that everything is perfect in its own way. It's there for a particular purpose. Sometimes it's to remind you that, oh, I am more than this. Okay, so it got me to this point and now I can move on, right? And so we have so many like millions of different layers that have to do with doing that, right? So we create tools. And what I always tell people is, what I tell others when I work with them, when I teach them and everything else, is tools are great to help us focus that energy, to help us get our minds out of the way and allow us to access that, because it all comes from within us. Like it's like, as people say, as above, so below. I always say as without, so within, as within, so without, same kind of thing. And that all we're doing with the tools is reminding ourselves, reminding each other how to focus that energy and bring it forth from ourselves. And that eventually it is for us to let go of the tools so that we just are that energy, because we are. It's all these bajillion steps of remembrance. So we're that energy, whether it's energy healing, we're that psychic, we're that visionary, we're the enlightened. We are already enlightened. We're already ascended. It's a matter of remembering how to be it. And we're catching up from all the creation of separation. We're allowing it to align and come back together. So the key to look at with all of this is constantly ask yourself, what am I a slave to? What am I a slave to? Meaning, what is limiting me? What is stopping me from going beyond? I ask that of myself all the time. And more times than not, when stuff comes in with me, like, and then it's like, oh, okay, it's time to shift this. And then I sort of shift the entire practice, the entire journey practice along, because it is for us to get into the habit, out of the habit of saying something that has been there for 100 years or 1,000 years is accurate and relevant today. Now, there might be pieces and parts to bring forward into today and to let go of others, but it doesn't mean the whole package has to come forward, right? And so it's a constant reassessment of looking at our realities and saying, like, we're doing that at the very 3D level, but it's also time for us to do it at the non-3D level, at the higher consciousness levels, at the spiritual stuff, at the consciousness practices, because that's part of consciousness is remembering unity and wholeness and self-empowerment as a divine embodiment, and that we have all the power within, and that all of this other stuff, it's all candy and tools to help us remember how to access that. Because part of the game, as I was saying, is us coming to this density and separation and forgetting all the rest of the parts of our consciousness and sort of just packaging this little piece of us in here and thinking that's all of it, and that everything else is outside, when it actually all of that is us. And so the tools are us too. We created the tools to help us remember, right? So somebody, and this is what I tell people, is like, well, I've had so many say to me things like, oh, well, I don't see things like you, or I don't have I can't do this like you. And I'm like, but you can. It's just you haven't remembered how to do it yet. And that's what my goal is. My goal is always working with people to help them remember how to access that power within themselves. It's time for us to stop taking power away from people and instead empowering them, empowering everyone to realize that we are the creators of our journey. We are the divine embodied. We are enlightened. We are the ones we've been waiting for. So there's no more like waiting for the guru or having to have somebody tell us something. Yes, a lot of times we get messages outside because we haven't yet remembered them inside. But the more we go and the more we commit ourselves to that consciousness and remembrance that I have all the answers. It's just I'm remembering what they are, remembering how to access them. That's the practice, and we just haven't done that to that extent. And to do it from a place of unity and wholeness, and knowing that you and I are the same, we're just different facets of the same divine consciousness. So that's the thought for this week. The thought for this week, or the consideration for this week, is to look at everything. Like, we've been looking at everything in our 3D, but also look at where we're judging others, because we say, oh, well, this, and I'll tell you, I've been guilty of that too. It's like, oh, I just don't understand that because feels so heavy. Well, to me, and maybe it doesn't feel heavy to somebody else, and so it's just different. It's just different for different people. It's where we are in this moment on the path home to remembrance. And is like, again, is as long as, and also look at everything you're judging, look at also within yourself, what is it that you might still be holding on to, that you've been practicing forever, that just doesn't make sense in your reality anymore, and own up to it and say, you know what, I'm not going to do this because other people expect me to do it. I'm not going to do it because I was told to do it. Does it make sense guidance wise? Does my guidance tell me that it's highest and best to do it? I can't tell you how many times I've come up with people who look at me like I have two heads, because I will go against the wave or go against the majority on something because my guidance is like, nah, nope. And it makes no logical sense, but there's always a reason. But this is part of the practice of getting to the place of listening to our own guidance over everything else. And also recognizing that this truly is it's truly a candy. It's like a candy store to me when we start looking at it that way, going, oh, look at all these amazing, fabulous tools. And what's even more amazing is as we have shifted into this next dimension, looking around and seeing over the past 7 years, how many new toys, I call them toys, new tools and practices and whatever continue to surface and change and evolve, because the new ones are constantly changing, evolving, because it's letting go of the paradigm of, oh no, this is how it was, so this is how it always has to be, right? So we're letting go of that, and some of them are so beautiful, and they all interrelate. And the more based in unity we all are, the more we recognize that it's all different words that say the same thing, all different words that have the same meaning of coming back together in that remembrance. So that's it for today. Thank you for joining me. I will see you. This is Angela Coulter. We'll see you next time on Living the Shift. Have a great week. Bye.